Welcome to the Live and Invest Overseas podcast. Please visit us at liveandinvestoverseas.com/podcast for more information on living better and retiring well overseas. Hello, I'm Kathleen Petticord.
And I'm Leif Simon.
And we're back with a new edition of our Live and Invest Overseas podcast. These past couple of weeks, we've been talking real estate. As our latest book has been published, is available now online, Buying Real Estate Overseas for Cash Flow and a Better Life. So over the past couple of weeks, we've looked closely at some educational aspects of the book, but there's another side to the book entirely. There are many sides. One is how to make money, how to earn cash flow, how to build a diversified cash flowing portfolio of property overseas. That, of course, is the overriding big idea here. But there are lots of other things going on, and one is Leif and I share some personal stories, not all of them flattering, some of them kind of embarrassing. We do some confessing in here, some truth telling, because I know everyone loves to hear about other people's failures. Fair enough. But we hope, as well as being entertaining, that learning of our failures is helpful for you to avoid making the same mistakes as you look to invest in real estate overseas. So I thought today it might be fun to look closely at a couple of our big disasters, our greatest disasters.
And I actually go into some of these in one of the presentations at our annual real estate event into much greater detail, also talking about some of the wins as well, but we can talk about just the losses today.
All right. So this section, how not to lose money, confessions of a couple of overseas property investors who have. All right. So we have, just to put it in perspective, we have invested in real estate in 24 countries, made 60 or more individual purchases.
Right.
And so I don't want you to think that we just lose. We've also made money. But all right, let's talk.
The winners don't stick in your mind as much as the losers do, unfortunately.
These big losers. So this one, Leif, we refer to it as the time you took a second bite. And right. I like this story because I had nothing to do with it.
So back before the 2008 global real estate crisis, when everything was booming, I was sent a project in the UK, in Newcastle, that looked like it was a good pre-construction opportunity and a long-term rental hold based off of all the numbers. I ran the numbers, did my research, and put a down payment on one of the units. And it was early in. These were the first units released, so it was the best price going to be available on this particular project. Then, I don't know, 4 or 6 months later, the developer reached out to people who had already purchased a unit to say a block of 10 units from the original launch have come back on the market because a group of Italian investors or someone who was representing some group in Italy backed out of their reservation. And so the developer was offering these 10 units at the original prices. By then, the prices had increased at least once on paper for what they were selling the next units as. And so I went ahead and took advantage of the timing and had some more cash to put as a down payment and took a second unit. And so there's a couple of lessons that we learned from this particular transaction. One is don't take a second bite. At least don't take a second bite too soon. Diversification is key. I talk about this all the time in my e-letter. And so I took the second bite. Jumping ahead, then this was like 2006, I think, 2005 maybe. Units were completed in 2007. Put them up for rental. The rents weren't quite what had been projected because even by then, before the rest of the world had caught on, this particular market in the UK, Newcastle, was starting to see some overbuilding and too many units coming online. And so the rents weren't quite what were expected, but they were still good enough. But by 2008, rents had dropped, hard to find a renter, and eventually, and these were both, we were able to get financing on them for the final payments to the developer. We ended up turning them back over to the bank. It was just too much. So there was the market side of things that really precipitated it all, but having 2 units made it much harder to even just carry on with the cash shortage from the rental.
Right, to recover. And there's another lesson here, which is that we did not know this market ourselves. Right. We'd never been to Newcastle. And at some point in the story, I'm not sure exactly when, but when it was becoming apparent that this wasn't working out as we might have hoped,
It was when the construction was completed and we took time to go visit the finished units.
go see them.
Right.
We knew within 3 minutes of getting out of the car that day, walking around the town, that we'd probably made a mistake.
Right. There was so much construction going on. The town isn't a high level town. It couldn't absorb all those units
Exactly.
at that price, at the prices that they were being sold. And yeah, so that is one of my mantras, one of my rules, which is don't buy something unless you go visit it. Now
or you know the market already.
Or you know the market already, but I bought things that I haven't gone and visited, and they've worked out. So if you're going to break that rule, know the risks you're taking by not understanding what's on the ground and just doing remote research.
All right, let's see what would be another fun one. Just this one. This is about knowing who your future potential buyer is going to be and making sure you have as diversified a potential exit pool as possible.
Right.
And I'm trying to read quickly. This is buying on the coast of Spain. And so, in fact, though, this is a success story for you because this is one of your biggest successes. One of your first purchases was a pre-construction unit on the coast of Spain. But it makes the point that you bought, well, I'll let you tell the story, but it would be easy for this to have been a disaster had you bought something else somewhere else.
And it was for a lot of people in 2008, 2009 in Spain. When that market turned, and it depends on what you're buying. What I bought in Spain, first pure investment overseas for real estate, was a pre-construction unit that worked out textbook. In fact, arrived in the area in Spain, so it was on the ground doing research along the entire coast of Spain for 2 weeks. Met a developer. They just launched this project like the day before I got there. In fact, half of the phase one had already been reserved. Went and visited the site, which literally was a site. They hadn't even put up a sales office yet. The fishing village and the fishing boats on the beach, and made the reservation. Put the property up for sale with the developer right away. And about 2 months before construction, about 2 years later, 2 months before construction was completed, the developer said, "Hey, we've got a buyer. Are you still interested in selling?" I said yes. So I was able to flip the property before. Had to come up with the final payment, final 70% to the developer, and made a nice profit over the appreciation over those 2.5 years. Then jump forward. So we bought that in 2000 and sold in 2002. Jump forward to 2008 when people were losing their shirt in Spain from having pre-construction properties, but also just rental properties that were no longer the same value that they had their mortgages on, and so banks were picking up properties left and right. Most of those were cookie cutter properties, and so what I bought in Spain was on the beach and true beachfront. What the most volume of properties in Spain typically are cookie cutter little townhomes, thousands of them. This looks like a sea of the same property, and that's who's your market to buy that at the end of the day, and
how many others just like yours might be available for sale when you're trying to sell.
Who's your competition?
Right.
So the double whammy in Spain was the market left, which was mostly Northern Europeans, British and Germans, in the two main areas that I pay attention to. And then the properties that were there were dozens of the same ones available. So you had too much competition, either renting or trying to sell when you needed to sell. So two lessons there. Who's going to buy? Definitely both the property I bought and the cookie cutter properties I'm talking about aren't being sold to the Spanish market. So if you're reliant on a foreign market, then you want to make sure that economy is going to continue to do well. And Central America is a good example that's reliant on the U.S. market, U.S. and Canada. The Belize real estate market, Roatan, even Costa Rica, more so than Panama, reliant on North America. Panama gets Europeans and South Americans as well. So who's going to buy this property from you? If you're buying in a place like Medellin, where we own, our future buyer could be another foreigner looking to buy a place to live or investment property, or a local. And so in big cities like that, you have a lot of different options when it comes to sell. If you have a property that'll sell to the local market.
All right. So for a third example, we actually have many versions of this experience, and that is to do with managing your rental manager,
Right.
or getting the right rental manager in the first place, which is the key to success with a rental property anywhere in the world, really. And the difference in the experience can be it can be the same property, but with a different rental manager, you can have a very rewarding, exciting experience, earning 8 to 10% net per year, reliably year after year, with everything managed painlessly. Or it can be a disaster where you're making no net and you're constantly dealing with problems because the rental manager isn't doing their job.
Right.
And the example we talk about in the book here is in Paris, where we had one apartment where we changed from one rental manager to another, and with that same property we saw this.
Well, with lots of properties over the years, but in Paris, one of our early short-term rental experiences, we had a rental manager that was recommended to us, was French, and wasn't up to speed on the types of reporting that we expected as Americans, or me as an accountant, to receive. But money was deposited into the bank account regularly, but to get her to report on who stayed, how many days, get an occupancy rate, anything like that, was virtually impossible. But the rental yield over the first year and a half that we had her was decent for Paris, especially at the time. It was like 5.5%.
Which is good for Paris, where values are much greater.
Right.
And also, just to make the point, with this first manager for this property during that year and a half we had her, the experience was painless. She was managing things. The renters
Right.
were taken care of.
It was just a pure lack of reporting.
Right.
And so then we were introduced to a different rental manager. We're looking at buying other properties. And so we thought, okay, well, let's work with this new person who was American living in Paris and knew the reports to send. And so we switched. Then we started getting the reports, but the revenue wasn't there. He wasn't able to keep the places filled. The properties were maintained fine, but and we got the reports, some months saying zero, because he wasn't able to market it and keep it filled. He didn't have that experience. So you want to pay attention to those things, and I've learned over the years to be more forgiving on the reporting, as long as the place is being
and the money
filled,
showing up in the bank
money showing
account.
up. Yeah.
Because you can keep track of the cash flow yourself. At least you know if the money's coming in, and you know what your expenses are.
Right.
So in other words, there are many aspects to choosing a rental manager, but I would say, you can comment, you still might feel differently, but I would say, based on our experience, the reporting aspect, there are certain practicalities that are not as important as, will that manager fill the unit?
Can they fill the
Can
unit?
they fill the
That's
unit?
the real question,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
And so you want a rental manager who has the capacity to keep the place filled, that they're not overwhelmed with too many properties. There's another thing. We had properties in Argentina when we first started with the rental management company. They were great. The person who launched that company was running things, and the place was filled, and we got reporting in that case, which was great. Then over time, they got more properties, and the original owner of the company moved on to other things. And between having too many properties, so there was a dilution for what they could keep filled for occupancy, and the new manager they put in place, who wasn't as capable, and so wasn't keeping the place filled or reporting. But it was the same management company. So over time, things can change with your management company. So you also have to pay attention to that.
Yeah, exactly. All right, let's talk about one more lesson learned, because I think these are really critical things to have in your mind, at the front of your mind, as you're shopping, as you're considering options. And we refer to this in the book as remembering the fundamentals, which is, and remember, the idea behind the book and our driving objective in making investments at this stage is cash flow.
Right.
And so this idea of remembering the fundamentals is to do with, don't allow yourself to make a purchase because you're counting on appreciation at any rate. the fundamental objective is cash flow.
Right.
And so based on a reasonable expectation of yield, of cash flow and income, rather than expectation or promise of appreciation, which may or may never appear.
Right. So in Ireland, when we first moved there, I was shocked to see that pretty much any investment property there that we looked at had an active net yield of 1% to 2%, 2% if you were lucky.
Right.
And they were rented properties, or they were projecting the rents would basically generate that level of return. And I couldn't figure out why people would buy those properties. Quickly I did. Basically, it was the market in Ireland had been appreciating so much for so long, for years, before we got there, that's where everybody expected the return to come from. They didn't care about yield anymore. They figured that 10% a year appreciation was going to continue forever. And of course it didn't. Ireland was one of the hardest hit countries when the 2008 global real estate bubble burst, and a lot of properties lost 50 to 70%.
Right.
Some properties still haven't recovered, 12 years later to their values from 2008. And it was all just speculation on future appreciation. People were buying rental properties with 110% mortgages, didn't care that they were putting cash into the property every month because they expected that 10% appreciation and was going to flip out of it in 2 or 3 years. And so that's a game of musical chairs that you don't want to be the last man standing.
Exactly.
And so 2008, 2009, after the crash, then the investors, the real estate investors, were the ones left, and everybody was back to looking for buying for yield. If you're buying a short-term or long-term rental property, you want that cash flow, and if you get some appreciation, great. But you're not counting on that for your income, for your profit.
Okay, we're going to call it a wrap there for today for this episode of the Live and Invest Overseas podcast. Thank you for listening. We hope you'll take a look for our book. It's available on Amazon, and we hope you'll keep listening and keep reading. You can always find us at liveandinvestoverseas.com. Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you for listening. We hope you enjoyed this episode of our Live and Invest Overseas podcast. For more, please visit liveandinvestoverseas.com/podcast, where you'll find lots more information and resources to help you live better and retire well overseas.